Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 13 and the iPhone 13 Pro have quite a few similarities, but also some differences and additional features with the 13 Pro. So I wanted to help you decide if you should pick up an iPhone 13 or if you should pick up an iPhone 13 Pro. Now the first difference is the iPhone 13 is a little less expensive and starts at $799. It goes up to $1,099 and has the option for 128 gigabytes of storage all the way up to 512 gigabytes of storage. If you want an unlocked version of the phone, meaning it's not attached to any specific carrier and you can use any SIM card you want, you'll have to pay an additional $30 for it with the iPhone 13. With the iPhone 13 Pro, it's a little bit different. It's $999 and goes up to $1,499. Again, it starts at 128 gigabytes for the storage option, but goes up to 1 terabyte for the total storage. So you can go all the way up to a terabyte if you need that additional storage. And the iPhone 13 has some different colors as well. With the iPhone 13, you have this newer blue color that I'm holding here, as well as pink, starlight, midnight, and red, or product red. With the iPhone 13 Pro, you have this new Sierra blue color that I'm holding here, along with gold, silver, and graphite, which are similar to the iPhone 12 Pro of last year. Now, the overall build of the phones is a little bit different. With the iPhone 13, it's made out of aluminum. The outside edge is aluminum, and all of the button placements are similar on them, but the outside edge is aluminum. And with the 13 Pro, you can see the SIM card tray is in a slightly different spot. So we have aluminum versus stainless steel with the iPhone 13 Pro. So the 13 Pro feels a little bit more substantial as far as its weight, where the iPhone 13 comes in at 6.14 ounces or 174 grams, the iPhone 13 Pro is 7.19 ounces or 204 grams due to that additional stainless steel and the larger cameras on the back. The overall size and everything else is identical though, and other than that weight in the build, they feel very similar in the hand, although there is that slight weight difference that you can feel a little bit. Also, the iPhone 13 Pro is slightly top heavy due to the additional camera and larger camera bump, so they do feel a little bit different, but either way, if they're in a case, you're probably not going to notice the difference. And the other thing with the size, noticing the camera bumps here, is that the cases will not interchange between both models. This year, the camera bumps are larger on the Pro models, since we have the same camera module as we do with the 13 Pro Max, where you'll need specific cases for those. Where last year's models, you could interchange the 12 and 12 Pro model cases, this year you cannot. So you'll need new cases for these phones. Now, as far as the displays, well, the displays are similar as far as the overall resolution. Both have a 6.1-inch display with 2,532 by 1,170 pixels at 460 pixels per inch. The exact same displays in every way as far as their resolution. However, the iPhone 13 does not go as bright with normal use. It has 800 nits of normal brightness at a max brightness, so maybe you're outside in sunlight, you can go up to 800 nits of brightness, where the 13 Pro can go up to 1,000 nits of brightness with normal use. So there's a difference there, although most people will not have a problem seeing either one in the sun. They both look very similar. Both of them go up to 1,200 nits, though, when playing HDR video. However, the iPhone 13 Pro this year has ProMotion, which makes the screen incredibly smooth when scrolling or going through different things. So maybe you're going into settings and scrolling through settings, it's extremely smooth. And you can see this in slow motion at 240 frames per second. As I swipe left to right or right to left on the display, you can see the smoothness on the ProMotion display under slow motion. You can see this in real life with its overall smoothness. Many apps are adopting this, and those apps, once this is turned on, will have that smoothness as well. It speeds up to 120 Hertz and then goes all the way down to 10 Hertz to save some power. So the display on the 13 Pro is a much more power efficient display as well. However, both of them do have PWM, or pulse width modulation, to control brightness, and this does not bother me at all with this year's phones. In previous years, specifically with the iPhone 10 when Apple switched to OLED displays, these are also OLED displays and they flicker the displays faster or slower to control brightness. You can't see this with your eyes, but it does cause some people to have headaches or feel nauseated, and with these particular phones, I don't have that issue at all. The PWM rate is so high that it's very hard to detect, even in slow motion. At 240 frames per second again, you can see that the 13 Pro is even harder to detect than the 13, but neither one will really bother your eyes unless you're extremely sensitive to PWM. If it bothered you with an iPhone 10 or 10s, I would try these as they probably won't bother you. Now, as far as the cameras go, the forward-facing cameras are identical this year, so there's no differences whatsoever, with the exception of the iPhone 13 Pro's ability to use ProRes. So if we go into the camera, you'll see that we have a ProRes option if you have it turned on in your settings. ProRes is a codec for encoding video that makes incredibly detailed but very large files. So you need an additional storage when recording with this. So if I turn on ProRes, you'll see it says max time remaining is 18 minutes. This is a 256 gigabyte model, and using ProRes will take up about the entire amount of storage in under an hour typically. It just depends on what you're recording, but normally it uses a lot of storage, and I don't recommend it for most people, but you will see a quality difference, and I'll show you that in a moment with a video sample. Now, in addition to ProRes, if we switch over to photos on the Pro also have the option for RAW photos. So just like the 12 Pro and 12 Pro Max introduced this feature last year, we have RAW photos on the 13 Pro models as well. Now, in addition to that, we also have a macro mode for photos. So if we get really close to an object, such as this 13, you'll see the camera switches on screen to bring us into a macro mode so we can get really close to objects and take very detailed, very tight up close photos. So as you can see, I can zoom in even further or get closer to an object than that, but you can see the dust around the camera lens that you can't typically see just by looking at it from here. So you have that option in the Pro model as well. It's not an option despite having an ultra wide on the 13. Now, as far as the rear cameras, that's where it gets a little bit different. We have much larger sensors on the 13 Pro, and you can see we have 3 different cameras. With the iPhone 13, we have a wide and ultra wide and a 2x optical zoom, but that's really using sort of a combination of optical and digital zoom. And this may not be a problem for a lot of people, as when you zoom into 2x on the 13 Pro, oftentimes it uses the same camera and just digitally zooms in depending on the light quality or the amount of light. That way you can actually get a clearer image with the better sensor or the larger sensor. All of the cameras are 12 megapixels, so you don't have any difference as far as megapixel size. However, on the iPhone 13 Pro, we have a wide, ultra-wide, and telephoto that goes up to 6x optical zoom according to Apple. Additionally, we have a LiDAR sensor that allows us to have better autofocus or allows us to scan rooms and things like that so that we can maybe build a 3D model of an object or a room, and it has some really nice features. Also, if you're using augmented reality apps a lot, the LiDAR comes in handy there. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the photos and video samples from these devices, and I'll show you the difference between maybe the photos they take as well as ProRes and those video samples as well, to see if you can determine if those features matter to you. The forward-facing cameras are the exact same between the iPhone 13 Pro and the iPhone 13. The main difference is ProRes. The iPhone 13 Pro has ProRes, which is just a higher quality version using a different codec. So you may or may not be able to see the difference here, but there is a difference when you zoom in. So it's a much higher quality video, and it works great not only on the forward-facing camera, but the rear-facing camera as well. Also, the microphones are identical between both of them. It's a windy day, and you should hear the exact same quality audio between the 13 Pro and the iPhone 13. So there's not really a compromise there except for ProRes. Now, when it comes to the overall specs or speed of the phone, both phones have Apple's latest A15 Bionic CPU. However, the iPhone 13 has 4 gigabytes of RAM and has a 4-core GPU built into that A15 Bionic. The iPhone 13 Pro has 6 gigabytes of RAM and has a 5-core GPU. Now, in everyday use, you probably won't notice the difference. However, that additional GPU core helps with things such as ProMotion and maybe scanning a room with LiDAR, and I can show you what that looks like. And basically, you can scan objects within a room using your camera with LiDAR to build that overall 3D model of the room. It's bouncing light off of whatever it's looking at and telling it how far it is away from it to build a detailed, accurate model. So you can sense things such as people and distance to people, maybe using the magnifying app. There's a lot of features you can use with that, and it enhances autofocus and augmented reality apps. So it's nice to have, especially if you're doing 3D modeling and things like that. Additionally, if we go into a benchmarking app, so maybe we go into Geekbench, you can see initially I ran Geekbench and I ran it on Metal, and these are, again, on the latest versions of their operating system and just running Geekbench. You can see the Metal scores for the 13 Pro are significantly higher at 14,560 compared to 10,853. So if you're doing 3D modeling or anything that's GPU intensive, you're going to notice a difference there slightly, but both of them are quite fast. If we take a look at the latest benchmarks for CPU, you'll see today here I ran this, and they're very, very similar. So with regular CPU tasks, opening apps and everything else, you're going to have very similar results, as there's not much of a difference when it comes to general Geekbench scores, just graphics. Now, as far as the battery in both of the phones, it's a little bit different between both of them. The iPhone 13 has a 3,227 milliamp hour battery that Apple says is good for 19 hours of video playback. However, the iPhone 13 Pro has a 3,095 milliamp hour battery that's good for more than that at 22 hours of video playback. While the iPhone 13 Pro has a smaller battery, it actually has better battery life due to the efficiency of the display. Now, the display on it, like I said before, can go from 10 Hz to 120 Hz to save power. So by doing that, you're gaining some additional battery life. And if we go into my battery life, I've been using this phone full time for a little while now. We'll wait for it to load. And over the last 4 days or so, you'll see yesterday, I had 3 hours and 15 minutes of screen on time, 9 hours and 16 minutes of screen off time playing music. Today, 2 hours and 13 minutes of screen on time, and again, 4 hours and 42 minutes of screen off time. And I'm only using about 30 to 40% of my battery in those different days. It really varies depending on what you're doing that day, but 75% of my battery use gave me 5 hours and 10 minutes of screen on time. Typically, I would expect 7 to 8 hours of screen on time with the 13 Pro, just in my general use. It can vary from person to person. However, the iPhone 13 will give you a little bit less, maybe an hour or so less, depending on what you do. That screen really makes a difference with efficiency. However, if you're recording a lot of ProRes video, you're going to see your battery deplete very quickly on the 13 Pro. So despite its smaller battery, the 13 Pro does get a little bit better battery life. Now, other than the things I've already mentioned, everything else is identical, from the speakers to the overall usage. Just the cameras, the CPU is slightly different, and that display in the battery. Everything else is pretty much the same. And then, of course, you need to consider the color of the phone that you want, price, and build. So both of them are great options. If you can afford the $300 price difference for the Pro and the cameras matter to you most, or battery life, I would go with the Pro. If those things don't matter at all, or maybe they have an incredible trade-in offer for the 13 for your current phone to maybe either get it free or less expensive, then I would probably go for the 13. It really just depends on your personal use. As far as charging and everything else, you're going to get the same speeds, and the overall experience is the same with iOS. Both of them are going to have the same updates for many years to come, up to maybe iOS 20 or iOS 21, since Apple seems to support them for at least 5 years. So as far as that part's concerned, I wouldn't really make that a consideration. It's more that if you care about the ProMotion display and the cameras and battery life. Otherwise, either one is great, and I can recommend either one. If you're more budget oriented, you don't care as much about the cameras or having the latest thing out there, I would go with the 13. If you care more about the cameras, you want that ProMotion display, then I would pick the 13 Pro as long as it's within your budget. But let me know what phone you're using this year. If you're upgrading to either one of these phones, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And of course, if you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, I'll leave it in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.